10 seconds. Hey everyone. So, super excited to be here with Rob Napoli today. And we are creating the first of a series of podcasts, conversations about international founders that are scaling abroad. Really interesting topic. It's got many facets. And today's conversation is going to be about the preparations that need to take place, essentially, before you even kick off a search, right? This is something that a lot of founders tend to overlook. So they come to us and tell us we need to hire a GM or we need to hire a head of sales. And we start asking the questions, and we both realize together that maybe, the alignment isn't there yet. And our suggestion for that is that, it's better to have these conversations earlier, 12 to 18 months in advance. And we'll talk about what those conversations need to be. So Rob, first, would be awesome if you can introduce yourself. You've been in this world for a really long time, working with international founders. You've had your own international experience. Tell us more about your world.
Yeah, my name is Rob Napoli. I'm currently the managing director for the Belgian American Chamber of Commerce here in the U.S. We colloquially call it BelCham, but it's the Belgian American Chamber. My journey has taken me from the Midwest, where I grew up in Kansas City, to Milan, Italy, where I coach professional American football, and to New York, where I've been for the last 10 years. My career started out in recruitment, so I actually have a background in recruiting software developers, as well as sales and marketing professionals. But really, when I came to New York back in 2017, I was working for a startup out of Italy and went through an accelerator program. We raised some money, but we realized how expensive the cost of entry is. And so I moved on from there. I worked at a large global recruitment firm for a couple of years. Then I launched my own business, which was called Hapday Group. I co-founded it with a buddy of mine, and it was a go-to-market entry program. So think sales as a service pre all the tools you have now, like Apollo, Constant Contact, all those things, where we helped European, specifically all international, but mostly European and Australia, enter and do like go-to-market testing and really build out kind of their sales process and methodologies. After that, we sold that in 2021. I launched my own little brand agency called Rise Up. I wrote a book on branding. I wrote a children's book, companion book to that. I launched a podcast, and I did a lot of work training international companies on how to have managers manage remote international teams. And then from there, worked with a number of government agencies like consulates and programs where I was doing a lot of entrepreneur in residence, which led me to the role at OmniBoost, where I was chief commercial officer, building that business and growing that globally, and to my role now as the managing director of BelCham. So I've done a lot of work internationally, worked with companies all over the world, have sold and recruited all over the world. So really excited to talk about this topic. This is, for the companies that are always entering through US, through New York, through my program here at BelCham and all the programs I've been around, hiring is always like the number one topic. So excited to dive into this today.
Yeah. And your journey has been really interesting and diverse. And you can speak to this from the perspective of a co-founder. You can speak to this from the perspective of a recruiter, which I love because we have some shared language. And then also just helping all of these startups be successful, right? So
Yep.
Having done this work for so many years and with so many different countries, nationalities, different founders, what are some of the themes that you see frequently kind of pop up?
Yeah, the biggest theme is just how big the U.S. is, right? It is large, and it's really easy to think of it. And the myth is, Europe's 27 countries, the U.S. is one country, but it's 50 states, and each region has its own kind of dynamic bit about it. So understanding a little bit about where are your customers, and if your customers are on the East Coast, are they on the West Coast, are they in the Midwest? Understanding where your customers are is the first kind of thing that we talk about. And the second kind of thing that we always talk about is how do you look and really think about talent acquisition in a new country. And Americans, Maren, as you know this, we like to, Tiffany, you're going to laugh because you're just like me, right? Being from the Midwest. Americans, we're really good at telling stories. We're really good at selling ourselves in a way that Europeans, Maren, you learn this the hard way, don't always do a great job at. And it's really hard when you're a founder who's used to hiring in a specific location to come to the US and the weed through, the BS a little bit, and the overly sales approach that Americans tend to take.
100%.
Those are the two things I see all the time.
It's a learning curve, honestly. I'm still on it.
And are you seeing any changes recently, I guess, with some of your, the clients that you're working with as they expand? Is that something that maybe 5 years ago you didn't see that is different? Just kind of as they enter in, what are some changes that you're seeing from now and 5 years ago?
Good question. There's not a whole lot of changes in the way that we do hiring, right? We always talk about all these tools and technology is going to change when we hire, but it really hasn't changed in the last really decade. I think the difference that's really changed in the last 5 years is the way automation and AI is used in the hiring process, and the filtering and the amount of applications you have to go through and understanding what you're looking for. And that's not a common language, right? We look at resumes, we look at our skills and background. There's no common thread. There is if you know what to look for, but on the outside, it's not a common language. And at the speed at which things are happening in today's market, that's the biggest change. Is things have happened so much faster with all the tools and tech that it's harder now to hire, I think, for your company than ever it was, based on the sheer amount of information that's flooded back at you. And let's be honest, most times when you're hiring, if you're hiring for a sales rep, you know what you're looking for in a sales rep, but you also have to dig into what exactly are they selling and what have they sold before and how does that translate. You're hiring for, certain roles have a little bit more black and white defined duties, but there's also that bigger understanding of, are they the right hire at the right time for the team? Because the company you are at 5 is different than you're at 50. The company you're at 50 is different at 100, and those skills change in terms of the culture you're building, the team and skills that you need to filter in. And that's the biggest change that we've seen in the last 5 years, just the speed at which that happens and the way that you go about and really filtering that out to find the best available into the market.
Great.
Yeah. And to do that well, you need to really know what you need at which stage for which role, and what those requirements look like. I think that's where our job is really interesting too, because oftentimes we figure that out together. And so you need to have a really clear role spec in order to go to market and find that person. And we often talk about the amount of just noise there is in recruiting, right? So you said AI has influenced that for sure. And so I tend to think it's really hard these days, even for candidates, to be seen, even if they objectively are the best fit for the role, to get that role, just because of all of those tools and the volume of applications that goes out there. Luckily, we deal with that less because we go to market. We build our sourcing map, we build our market map, and then we approach candidates on a very targeted basis. But 100% that resonates. And another thing we hear a lot is, we just need some boots on the ground. Like, we just need someone to execute. It's almost a cliche, right? And I'm curious what your response is to that, because it sounds almost like they're trying to find someone just to fill a seat, to have a placeholder.
Right. Yeah, and that in theory sounds good, right? I just need somebody to execute a sales process, or execute on operations, or execute on this, that, or the other. And that sounds good in theory. But when you're entering a new market, there's usually very specific things that you need. Mostly driving out a commercial go-to-market, because the way you go to market in the US is very different than Europe. And there's always these different things. And so I look at it in two ways. The question I'm sure you all get asked is, do you need an SDR or a senior leader, right? And I understand boots on the ground, but when you have boots on the ground, you hire one person to fill a seat. You also need to look at, can that person operate literally and figuratively on an island, right? Because they're the first person there. They don't have an office. They don't have a team, especially if you're in Europe or even in Australia. The time zone difference from anywhere from 6 to 12 hours makes a big difference. And so I always like to say, I think that if you're looking to come into the market, somebody from your team, ideally in your C-level or founder, should have come over here enough and sold a margin. I always like to say, it's no exact science, like the first 150K, because then you understand what you're looking for. You know how to sell. You've done that. You've had the process. Then you actually have a better understanding of what is the right boots on the ground, in air quotes, that you need, because it is very different, just executing versus the right understanding of doing the right things, because some people are good at operating independently. They need a team to support them, and they need that kind of operation around them to drive forward. And some people are really good at like, I don't need anything else around. I just need to go. And
Right.
that's the biggest thing that we don't think about. And so when people just say, I just need boots on the ground, it's always like, what kind of boots? What is the goal here? And what do you see in the next 3, 6, 12 months? And do you have a good onboarding plan when they're 6 hours behind? Because you're still running a business in another country, another part of the world. Can you support them? And that is where so many people fail, is they hire somebody they think is the fit. And in 3 to 6 months, they're like, I can't do this on my own. I'm not getting the support. I don't have the resources. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And they leave you. And that's a huge costly mistake.
And I think that's something that we see all the time, right? When we're talking to founders or teams looking to expand, I guess US or even Europe, is they just want someone there. So I think the biggest thing, like Maren and I and our team ask, is, well, why? What is this going to do? Is it just to say you have a US presence? And then also, what do you want this person to accomplish? And I guess like the support also that you mentioned, like, what are you going to give that person? What are your commitments that you're going to do to make sure that this person's successful? And it's just not, another name on your website saying you have a US presence. So that's really important, I think.
It is. And, I've had the unique experience of being the first boots on the ground for companies before. And I can tell you the good, bad, and the ugly. And because of my background and having traversed and lived in different countries and done different things, I'm more well equipped than others to do that. But if you don't know how to go and do the things on your own, it puts you at a real disadvantage. So I love that you asked that question. Why are they there? What is the goal? Is it to scale? If they're going to scale and you want them to sell, do they have all the right tools and resources to understand the product? Are they able to make decisions unilaterally? If it's 3 o'clock on a Friday and you're trying to get a contract signed, that's 9 o'clock in Europe. And, somebody's at dinner out, like, are you going to be able to get that contract signed? Like, so they have that ability, the skills, the wherewithal, and, the confidence in that person to make those decisions. If not, you're running on a delay, and that causes a real issue. And then the other thing to think about when we talk about boots on the ground is that the service aspect. Maren, you'll understand this. The way that Tiffany and I grew up with customer service in the US is very different than Europe, and we look at it very differently. And that's also a big thing, is can that person handle those conversations, those calls at 5 o'clock on a Friday, and be able to do the best thing for the company that doesn't put you in a hole or make you look like, oh, you're just a placeholder. You don't make any decisions. And I got to wait till Monday to something to come back. And that causes issues.
Yeah. It could be very isolating as well, right? If you're not giving that autonomy to make those decisions and be there, especially with the time change. So.
Exactly.
Yeah. One thing I hear pretty regularly too is that Americans can be surprised about the respect that there is for time off in Europe. Right.
Yeah.
So they're essentially thinking, I've been given the mandate to build something here and I want to get it done, but I can't reach anybody. And people go on vacation for 2 or 3 weeks and they just have their out of office on it. And that's it.
Yeah.
End of conversation.
Yeah, I'm not sure what this concept of vacation is. Maybe you can explain it to me.
You should try it. It's fun.
No, it is a real thing, right? The work-life balance, and I don't look at work-life as a balance. I mean, it's a balance, but it's a spectrum, right? And it's a sliding scale based on high season, low season, priorities, and those things. And that's very different here. And that is a big opener if you're not ready for that, especially if you're hiring somebody, say, from New York, who's a lot more like dialed in versus maybe somebody from the West Coast that has a little bit more respect for the time off, or driving from meeting to meeting. Like, all those things come into play and take into factor of like what you need in the right person to have those, going back to the boots on the ground. And then, Maren, you kind of said it, like, if I'm hiring somebody, to build something, there's the kind of next myth is like builder versus scaler, right? And we look at, are you hiring somebody to be a builder and building out a new market? Or are you hiring somebody that has traction? Because like, you look B2C, you could have a lot of traction. That person's coming into scale versus B2B. Maybe you have a pilot customer. Now they have to go and build up that pilot customer. And that's also very different when we're looking at skill sets and on boots on the ground. And so it all kind of ties back into that myth of what is the ideal first hire. And it's not the same for everybody. Everyone thinks it's either just somebody that can execute like an SDR, or it's a VP of sales that has this amazing black book that comes in and does everything, but that's not enough anymore.
Yeah. Let's talk about that builder versus scaler subject. It's interesting, right? And I think a lot of the time when we first start talking to founders and, they describe their ideal person, it's not necessarily clear yet. Now, I'm wondering if that's kind of a founder clarity problem, like if they aren't entirely sure what they want this person to deliver, or if it's a hiring problem. And sometimes it can be either or both, right? So the market also delivers certain types of profiles more readily than others. So how do you see that balance?
That's a $1 million question. If I knew the answer to that question, I think I'd be rich doing something else, as we all would be. It's really, you kind of hit everything is two sides of the same coin, right? It's the founder clarity of what exactly is to be done, but it's also like, what is the market asking for, right? In terms of, if you're coming into a new market and you're really launching or driving, do you have a go-to-market process in place? Because you could have the best, I've known this for a long time about salespeople specifically, but sometimes the best sellers can only sell when they have the right support and information. Some people can sell out of nothing because they're just really good at like figuring it out. And so understanding what you have in place and what you're arming that person to do is more important than the profile. And that comes down to that founder clarity. They need to have clarity. What do they have set up as a go-to-market function in motion? And are they committed, ready, willing, and able, and have the resources to commit that to the person they're hiring? Because that changes who you look for. And you could do both, right? But it really is a founder first. What is your go-to-market function? Do you have everything set up? And maybe you don't know what you don't know, but that's where you need to tap into resources and make sure that you're bringing somebody that can set a go-to-market function forward for you.
And have you had experience with any of your clients of that kind of wrong hire because of those reasons? And were there early warning signs that maybe we could have, whether the firm could help, the agency, or you could hire better looking kind of from another perspective?
There's more stories than I care to count. And the other thing that I think international founders really have to understand about the US that I think is very culturally different is we are an at-will employment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which means you can hire and fire fast. And that's very different. If you don't understand that, it changes. And then also the market speaks differently here. I think the average account executive is in their role for 18 months before something else comes along. And so understanding, and so many times that they've hired, they don't give support, and 6 months later that person is gone because they want a company that supports them. Right. And the founder didn't even realize that they didn't set them up for success. And that's an eye opener for them. So I think it comes back to the original question that should be asked on this is, what are they there to do? Do you have a plan for them? And are you committed and willing and able to give them the resources needed to go and grow? And if you're not, then you shouldn't be hiring. You need to make sure you have all those boxes checked. I think that's a really key point that you said. The best time to start the conversation is 12 months before you went into the market. Start having those conversations now so you can fill those gaps in and start building that plan as you go. And that also allows a partner like yourselves or whoever they're using, or if they're hiring internally, to really build out a proper profile, knowing what they need to fill the gaps in on.
Yeah. And we see it too many times that those things aren't kind of decided upon prior. So we're on kind of that second round of, okay, it didn't work out, we need someone. So again, I think that the moral of the story is make sure you have all of your I's dotted, your T's crossed before even going out to find that, because it's going to have a negative impact on the business down the line.
It is. And then the other thing you're doing all of these buckets that you have to fill, and there's a really key bucket that blows most founders' minds, and that is compensation. The cost to employ somebody in the US.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a great topic. It's always a bit of a bombshell, I have to say. Just that I have with founders, and it's hard to get right. And one of the issues is that founders look at the US and they think, okay, it's more expensive, so we need to factor in, I don't know, 2 times the base comp or 2.4, whatever factor they're using, but they're not looking at compensation as a package. And it's more complex than that, right? Because it's also about equity. It's also about bonuses. Like, how do you keep people motivated?
Yep.
And it's something that we talk about a lot because, founders need some guidance on that, which is completely fair. But I'm curious, in your world, is it something that a lot of people are kind of caught off guard about? Or do you have a lot
Yes.
of these conversations too?
All the time. All the time. Because they think that they can get somebody cheap, young, whatever, green, and just go, or they can get somebody more experienced and tip them with equity. If you've been around this game enough, equity is an amazing thing to have, and that's huge. But equity is nothing until it's something, and the hit rate on that is really low. And if you look at, I guess, Tiffany, to your earlier question, one of the things that was changed in the market is everyone still wants equity, but we value equity lower now than ever before because of that. Unless you're a blue chip company that is doing something, and there's a plan laid out, equity is nothing until it's something. And so we just see it's like, oh, what's the average? Somebody asked me, what's the average, compensation for like actually I just had a conversation a week ago, like what's the average compensation for an account executive? I was like, somebody 4 to 6 years, like, yeah, perfect. So starting at 80, looking 80 to 120 base with a double back end bonus. So you're looking at 160 to 220 OTE. That doesn't include, do you have benefits set up? Are you going to give them a stipend? Are you doing cell phone? Are you going to do like, health and wellness stipend? And all those things need to be factored in. So that OTE now comes to balloon to 250, 260, 300K total comp for one employee. And they're not expecting that.
Yeah. That's the number one sticker shock when we're talking with clients expanding here is the base. I think the base, they're like, oh, well, we can give them a lower base and maybe a higher OTE bonus. But they don't factor in that obviously the US, when it comes to different expenses, insurance, those types of things are factored into the base. So they see it and they're like, wait, because it's very different. So that's kind of, our role is educating and making them understand. It's not that they just want a lot more money because that's what they want. It just, it's a different category and compensation packages here.
Yeah. And also something to think about is when you're launching a new product in a new market, and I've worked in roles where I've taken lower base for bigger bonus, and it's worked out, and sometimes it hasn't. And you think about it in the sense of it can be a really cool product, something really new, and you're really excited to launch it here. But you also may not believe that, there's also the belief in yourself of like, I gotta believe I can do this, I can scale it, I can build it. But there's also that kind of, you want to protect yourself. It's like, I'd rather have a higher base, less bonus to start, prove that the market is ready and that this hits, and then switch that later because you're building into it in a growth mode. And that is something you're seeing now more than ever is people want their money up front and are willing to take less on that back end for more up front because that gives them stability to believe that they can go build it and they have the time. The other thing that you have to really think about it when you're hiring at this is what is the runway you're giving them to build? Because we know the average sales cycle of something is 6 to 18 months. So if you need to have a return on investment in 6 months and it takes 6 months to do a sales cycle, they're not selling out the gate day one. It's 30 to 60 onboarding, 30 to 60 day onboarding. You're already looking at this wrong. And these are the things that we don't always think about. It's really easy to forget that you have to do an onboarding period and then they have to go to market. And then there's a sales cycle period that goes with it. And if you don't have those data points or at least have an expectation, you're setting yourself up for failure. That person is going to be gone anyways. And that also is a big mistake people look at is like, oh, they're going to sell and have revenue coming in 6 months, but the sales cycle is 8.
Yeah.
And then nothing's there in 6 months. And then it's like, well, what are we doing?
Yeah. And we're going to talk about how to retain that person after you've hired them, right? So what's the role of a leader in that process? But I just wanted to mention one other thing that I noticed in some of our hiring processes, which is that from the candidate's perspective, it's also an opportunity to establish the right set of parameters for compensation, right? If they're the first person coming into a new market and they have the opportunity to kind of have that conversation with the founder and talk about what's important. And to Tiffany's point, educate them on what's critical in the US market and then set that up. And then the next hire is going to be that much easier. And so, so that's something that I think they could really use as kind of a window to get that right. So let's talk about what happens after you make the hire, right? So that's not where the work ends. You could even argue that's where it actually begins. And
so it really begins.
It's really where it begins. And we're going to have a whole separate conversation about that, right? We're going to talk about how it affects the process, that things are different in the US. We're going to talk about expectations that are different in the onboarding period and beyond. But let's briefly touch on that today as well. What are you seeing? Like, what does a founder or hiring leader need to do and not do in order for this person to have a really good start?
Yeah, that's a great topic, and obviously you're going to go deeper on. But from a high level, and this all kind of goes back to that beginning. What are you doing and why? Because in those first hires, it's critical to have a 12-month kind of roadmap. What do you expect this person to do? What are the KPIs? What are they expected to achieve at a certain kind of milestone? Because one, that gives them what they're building to, and two, it creates this retention process. Because if they start and don't have an understanding of what the 12 months might look like in the first year, you might operate at a loss. But are they building enough things that in year two, you're operating at a profit? And so when you start from the early conversations of what is this person coming in to do, and then once they get started, that onboarding needs to be very clear, set up with those things in mind of, all right, if we need you to do something in 6 months, 9 months, 12, in that first 30 days, are they getting the information they need to do that? And that could be bringing them over to wherever your headquarters is so they can meet the team, develop those relationships personally, because you're going to need help. That's also making sure they have the FaceTime, whether that's virtually or in person, with all the team leads, the deep dive on the product. That's a deep dive on where to find things and kind of I call it their kind of ultimatum pack. These are the things that you're clear to do. These are the things you need approval for. These are the things you're not allowed to touch. And if you do that right at the beginning and the onboarding stage, then you have them bought in. But if you don't have a plan for that, and you try to figure it out as you go, which is totally fair and kind of how you have to do things as you're growing. And sometimes you build the plan while flying it. If you don't have those markers in place with clear milestones that you can kind of reach on and grab onto, you're going to lose that person, and there's no chance of retaining them. They're going to be gone in 6 months, and the next person you bring in, it's like you're sitting upriver in a boat without a paddle, and you can't be in that position. And that's where most people think, okay, I got the person, and they're going to do everything, and I'm just going to sit back and let them cook. Well, no chef can walk into a brand new kitchen and cook without knowing where everything is and having the right support and sous chef or whatever that is to make the food. And so it's really important. Those first 90 days are the most crucial in any onboarding, because if they don't feel supported in the first 90 days, they're gone. You've lost them.
I love your analogy about the boat without the pedal, and also the weather conditions that can change. Yeah.
Because part of this whole hiring is a risk, right? Mm-hmm. We're hiring based on skills, feel. There's a very human element to hiring that you have to understand. And as you're building out a culture is something that changes over time and it has to constantly evolve. Mm-hmm. And so you also need to bring in people that you can blend those ethos in. You don't want to have a stagnant, well, we've always hired the same, and so everyone's the same, because then you have all the same skills. It's like, I love using sports, analogies, but you can't build, a dynasty with all Tom Brady. Tom Brady needs a gritty center that can help make calls for the line. He needs receivers that can go make things happen. It needs a line that can block for the running back. It needs a running back that can get 4 yards to move the chains so that you build around. So each person and skill that you bring in needs to be uniquely different. And that is a very human thing that AI will never be able to tell you. And that is the hardest part about hiring is, and I've seen too many hiring processes like, oh, you like the Yankees? I like the Yankees. And you talk 30 minutes with the Yankees and you walk out of the room, man, Tiffany's great. We talked to the Yankees, is super awesome. But we actually did dive into what does Tiffany do well? Where does she fail? How she walked me through how she overcomes adversity. And then I'm not actually building the proper team. And I miss so much being enamored by commonality and not on what I'm hiring the person to do. And that's the hardest part about, I think, in hiring is really, do I know why this person's in and how do I fit them into the team to be the best efficient version of themselves versus, oh, I like the person, I want to hire the person.
Right. And I would say Chicago White Sox, not
That conversation would be so short with me. It'd be done in a minute.
Well, technically, I'm a Royals fan, being from Kansas City, but being out here in New York, Yankees are the best, use case. But this is where this, and I know you're going to deep dive into all these things, but this is where hiring gets so complicated. But it's that the first part of it is overcoming the myth that it's easy to hire and making sure that the founders and teams that are scaling when you're going into a new market, that you have a good plan. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I always tell my team 70% of something good is better than 100% of something late. It can be good, it can be 70%, and you can figure it out as you go, but you need to have those things in place of understanding why they're coming in, what they're doing, and are you making sure they have the tools, technology, and support needed to get going. If you do that, your first 90 days is successful. And that's chapter 1 of a new hire. Then then you have chapters 2 and 3, which I know you'll go into in this series, hopefully. And that could be another hour-long conversation. We talked a lot here, very high level. The idea, the hope I'm giving is that you understand that it's not as easy to think, oh, we're ready to go to the US, we're gonna hire a senior sales leader. No, ask the questions and find a partner that asks those questions and helps you think critically. It should be frustrating because that's when you really build out a plan to then be like, okay, we know what we're walking into and we can make a good decision. And you have confidence in that level of bringing those people on because you know that they're stepping into something you've really thought about and challenged yourself on. And I always tell people, don't look for validation, look for opposition, because that's where the gaps get filled. Look for opposition in your hiring process. Look for opposition in what you're looking to do. And that's where the why really comes out. And when founders do that really well, they hire much better.
Agreed.
Okay, I think we have one last topic. Very interesting, and it resonates a lot. So talking about global expansion and international companies pushing into new markets. I'm curious because you work with founders from kind of around the world, you could say like 27 different countries you've seen, right? Where is the appetite right now? How is the appetite? Are a lot of founders still thinking about international expansion? And specifically, since we are in the North American market, to the US or Canada?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And we could go on for hours on this, but the high level of it is that the appetite for North America is still big. It's one of the biggest markets in the world, and that's not changing. There's all the things geopolitically you can look at and the conditions in the world. There's so many things that you can kind of take a look at and could deter you. But the market itself, from a business perspective, is, and I don't see it failing anytime future, is going to be a big market to go after. So the appetite's always there and highly desirable. The thing that I always like to tell founders, and this is where you kind of push back on them, is have you dominated your market yet, right? Do you feel confident that if you had to remove yourself for 90 days to come to the US and hire this person and give them an onboarding, that your team can operate in your local market without missing a beat? And maybe that's your local market, say the Netherlands or say Belgium. I would say I look at the wider Benelux. So do you have a good foothold in Benelux, and can the Benelux run and support the company while you're off doing this thing? If you say no, that's an issue, right? Unless you're like saying, hey, we're wanting to completely move out of Europe and go straight to the US, and we're going to be a US company, that's a different conversation, right? And so the appetite is there. And the question I always get is, when is the right time? And the answer I always give, when you're ready. When you're ready to take that leap, you can't test the water with a toe. You got to dive right in. When you're ready to dive in and you feel that it is time, and you feel that if you don't do it now, it's never, that's the time. And that's a conversation that needs to start early. Because if you're not ready and it feels like time, then you're going to miss the boat, because by the time you set all that stuff up, or you can just throw money at the problem, which is never going to work, but here nor there. And so what I say is the appetite's always going to be strong and continue to be strong, but make sure that you feel confident that you can remove yourself from the equation to build something, or you can remove one key person out to go build something with this person. That's when it's the right time to go, because you know that your team is strong and everything else is operating. So you have your baseline, you have ability to make money and still hit above the threshold, whether that's, break even, the profit, whatever you are in your kind of cycle. So that'd be how I'd answer the question from a high level without going too deep into it.
That's great. And I think a question that is so important, because we don't always think about the 6 months too. I think that really resonated with me, because you don't think of it, but yes, if they can separate themselves for that amount of time, that means they're doing okay there. And now it's time to build here. So that's great.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you could tell a founder who's kind of 6 months away from making that first US hire, what to do, just if there's like one tip what would it be?
Start talking to anybody and everybody you can, asking questions and validating that you have. And if you don't have a plan, start asking for help to build that plan, and understand that you take all advice with a grain of salt. But the more people that you could talk to and leverage, and that's what I love about my role at BelCham as managing director here, is so many of our companies that are members, maybe in Belgium or the wider Benelux region, that are looking to expand will call us to ask these questions. And that's what you need: those community, you need those partners, you need those people in your network to do is, hey, here's what I'm thinking, here's the timeline, here's what I have, where are my gaps? Ask those questions. I tell them, start calling people, start leveraging your network and asking those questions now. You should have been doing it a little while longer, but sometimes, you get busy. But if you have 6 months, start asking those questions and really start focusing on that and dedicate some time. And by the time you're kind of ready, you're going to be going. And then also just to give yourself a little grace in the process. You might make mistakes. You might see things you like. You know that you got to move quick, and candidates are in the market long. They're having multiple offers, and don't have buyer's remorse. If it doesn't feel right, don't do it. It's better to take an extra time on the search and do that. Or if you feel like it's right, you're like, oh, maybe I need to validate it, but it feels right. Just go for it. When you have that feeling, be decisive, because the beautiful thing is you can always reverse out of that quickly in an at-will market. And so when you come to the US 6 months out, start being decisive and make decisions. Because if you don't, you'll lose out on all momentum. So you got to start asking the questions, looking to validate your plan. And then when you're ready, be decisive and find partners that will help you make good decisions and start running. Because the only way you're going to learn is by doing.
Yeah. Very good points. And it's all about momentum.
It is. And I think that's the hardest thing to do is make the decision, because you don't want to mess up. But give yourself grace to allow for that, especially in your early hires. I mean, I'm sure you asked the question this to the founders too. It's like, hey, because they're always afraid to make a mistake. When you hired your first person, what mistakes have you made in the past? Yes, it's at a bigger scale here, but I also remind founders and business leaders who are coming to the market, give yourself a little bit of grace. You need it. You deserve it. The market's not always what you think it is, but that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. And every hiring process is always a learning process, right? And if you're hiring for an interesting role, you're going to meet candidates that are going to teach you things and they're going to open your eyes to things. And that's so valuable. So it's also okay to take those learnings and enrich your perspective or pivot slightly in terms of the search. That happens a lot.
Replacing humans. I mean, it's not black and white, right? Things are going to change. Things are going to be different. So,
yeah.
100%. And, I think that's the key to it. And the beautiful thing about hiring process, you can create a process and it can work, but no two hiring processes are ever the same, because you are dealing with humans, just as Tiffany said, and you're dealing with humans on both sides, which is different than selling a product where you're selling technology. You have humans on both sides. So there's feelings, there's ego, there's different wants and needs in everybody. And so as long as you just understand that and know that it's not black or white, and that you need to give yourself a little bit of time to carry momentum, then I think you'll be all right in the hiring process. And you can build a really good, scalable process for the right people, knowing that it's always going to change. And that's the beauty of it.
Yeah. And hands down, my favorite part of this job is getting to work with such diverse people that have different ways of looking at hiring and looking at the market, looking at their business, and different ways of collaborating. And just through conversations, you really get to know each other and you figure it out. And you figure out a way to pinpoint what it is that they need. And it's really fun, actually. It's my favorite part of the job. So getting to do that with many different founders is like a bonus.
It's matchmaking. That's what I love. It's just matchmaking.
At the end of the day, or it's all it is, dating people to fill a need and really build something special.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Ed. It's been so good to hear your rich perspective on these topics. So thanks so much for joining us, Rob. We're definitely going to stay in touch. We'll see each other. And thanks for joining today. And thanks, Tiffany.
And thank you. Thank you both.
See you again soon.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. And if I can ever be of service to you or anyone out there listening, I'm sure that you'll have my information in the show notes. So feel free to reach out to me if I can help in any way as well.
Yeah, a little plug for Rob. Rob is also a great coach and can train public speaking skills, which is also something that's very topical for founders that are, practicing their pitches. So.
It is. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I appreciate you both for letting me be on and chat about this. This is a lot of fun.
Sounds
Thank you
good.
so
All right,
much.
Rob, have a great week. Have a great week,
Yeah.
Tiffany, and talk to you
Thanks.
soon. Bye.
Ciao.